There, welcome to episode 86 of Forgotten Cello Music. My name is Aaron. The episode this week is called Familiar Music in Tenor Clef. Subtitle, Relearn All the Easy Music in Tenor Clef. Why am I approaching this subject in a podcast that I have termed Forgotten Cello Music? Well, in it, I'm going to explore a little bit more deeply as to the reasons of that. And let's get right into it in this episode. Why do we even use the tenor clef nowadays? What's the reason for this episode? I'll get to that soon. I wrote a book to aid in learning the tenor clef. The approach in my book, that is using familiar tunes that are simple, then the format of my book, Familiar Music in Tenor Clef, and how does it even fit into Forgotten Cello Music, and let's just get into it right now. Well, really, even though the tenor clef is used widely, it seems like it's not very well focused on in lessons, nor is it focused on in any method that I've used. Sure, it's there, it's presented, it's introduced, but I don't think it's dwelled upon very much, and it certainly is not, eased into or introduced in an incremental manner so that one gets really used to it. Now, obviously, cello teachers could do a better job of this, and certainly I can. And that's one of the reasons that I'm writing this book, is I want to do a better job of getting the students comfortable before it's actually time to play a pretty hard piece. Chanson Triste by Tchaikovsky, anyone? Suzuki Volume 4, the last number in that volume. So, be that as it may, it is a challenge, and I want to do something about it, and hence the book. Oh, also, this happens to be the very first episode, if you're listening as an audio podcast, that I will put in its entirety out there as a video episode. I am recording this simultaneously on audio as well as in video formats. And you can find that in my, podcast tab, I think it is, which is an actual tab in YouTube on my channel, Traveling Cello. Right, where can you find my book, Familiar Music in Tenor Clef? It's available in 2 different formats, and this is kind of cool because I just started doing this year, at the end of the year, only a month and a half ago. It's on Amazon, print on demand, paperback. You can also go print it out for yourself if you buy a PDF on my Patreon, Aaron Sinnott, Traveling Cello. You can go to Sheet Music Plus, MuseScore, and probably a couple other websites that I can't remember at the moment. You can also become a paid member on my Patreon and get some free PDFs that way. Usually, only the higher tier is given full book PDFs. You can get excerpts from time to time that I like to upload and give you all something to look at and appreciate. Right, let's get on with it. The struggle of tenor clef. This is something that I don't think I've ever witnessed anybody be at ease with. The tenor clef, that is. What is it? Why do we use it? And I think we can find that answer in a couple of different ways. But I'm going to start with the first one that is probably where we actually read any evidence of it for most of us. Now, I think you should read this book, The Violoncello and Its History, by Joseph Wasilewski. Now, if you don't read the entire thing, I can understand because there's a lot of information there, and it gets kind of tedious if you're not just interested in reading lots of information about cello players and the history of the cello. But the one about the development of the clefs and the sheer number of clefs that cellists used in the day is pretty fascinating. In this book, Wasilewski goes all the way from the predecessors of the cello up to, I think it is 1890. And the book was published in somewhere in the mid 1890s, if I recall right. In the book, Vasilevsky talks a lot about the technique, the development thereof, and also the compositions and what is utilized and how people stretched compositions. We also read about how Boccherini was one of the key contributors to reducing the number of clefs. And somehow we had gotten all the way up to 6 or 7 different clefs in the course of writing music. And I'm not entirely sure why, because it never really makes sense. Anyway, Boccherini narrowed it down to what we use today: bass, tenor, and treble clefs. They're very common. You can find all 3 of them in most standard repertoire. And here's the question that most students express, if not out loud, on their faces. Why do we still use this tenor clef today? I mean, is there actually a point to it? Especially when it's so difficult to overcome. Let's start off by just stating the obvious. Bass clef and treble clef, those 2 alone would actually cover all of the notes very well. And sometimes I think, you know what? I think I'm just going to rewrite a whole bunch of music that uses tenor clef and write all the tenor clef stuff in treble clef, or at least most of it. And it may vary depending on the portion of the phrase that it's in. I mean, treble clef goes down, I think you can comfortably read it down to an A, maybe even lower than that, a G. Those are just 2 ledger lines below the lowest line of the treble clef. And in bass clef, we often read up to the 3rd and 4th ledger lines above the top line, which of course is the A string note. And it's even written very often with ledger lines in 5 ledger lines, sometimes 6. That's really pushing it and looks pretty bad. So I can understand the use of another clef there. But for example, if you wrote the A harmonic, which is 3 ledger lines and it's in the space above that 3rd ledger line in bass clef, if you were to rewrite that in treble clef, do you know where it would be? It would be the 2nd space up from the lowest line. I mean, there's no reason for using the tenor clef in that regard. It doesn't make any sense as far as writing notes are concerned. So whatever the reason is historically, I guess it doesn't really matter in a way, because the fact of the matter is that we are still getting major publishing houses that are printing in the traditional manner. That is, the traditional manner that Boccherini more or less established with those 3 clefs. And I guess for me, it is also a badge of honor. It's kind of like, wow, I learned how to do this. I conquered this terribly difficult exercise in transposing music into a different clef, and why don't you do it too? It makes us kind of cellists in a way. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. Let's get on with learning it. Now, the book that I wrote, Familiar Music in Tenor Clef, or Familiar Tunes in Tenor Clef, I found that in general, whether you are brand new to an instrument or you are trying to learn a new skill, as in reading tenor clef, but it could be something like learning to slur multiple notes, many notes, or shifting, or any number of things. Using simpler music, or just open strings, of course, any teacher would advocate for open strings, is one of the best ways to go. You unclutter your mind, you are able to focus on the new skill, the new task at hand. So if you're using pieces like Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, Jingle Bells, Are You Sleeping, a bunch of folk tunes, for example, that is music that you've most likely heard since you were a baby, and you even learned to play most of those little folk tunes. French folk song, Song of the Wind, you name it. Suzuki Book 1 has a bunch of them. That will be much easier. And of course, you can use music by famous composers, Beethoven's Ode to Joy, Handel's chorus from Judas Maccabeus, Bach's famous minuets. I mean, any of those that you just really know. You've heard them many, many, many times, and you've probably played them almost as many times as you've heard them. So, what if we were to go back to these pieces and relearn them, so to speak? I think you have a great advantage. You already know how they proceed. You have a good idea of what notes are to be played, fingerings, which strings you're going to play on. So there's not a lot left to figure out other than actually just reading the music in the tenor clef. The way that I have organized this book, I think, is pretty straightforward. The format is as follows. The first 5 tunes has these much more simple pieces. You start with the bass clef, so you can read it easily, but then I transpose it, rewrite it in tenor clef, exactly the same notes. Exactly the same notes. Everything is the same. The register, the fingering, the strings you play on, exactly the same note names. It's all right there. It's just written in tenor clef. I think this gives the brain a chance to wrap itself around what it's looking at. So you're seeing exactly the same note in the same register with the same fingering on the same string, but it's in a different location on that 5-line staff because of the tenor clef. So, for example, middle C on the bass clef is that one ledger line above the top line of the staff. Whereas the tenor clef, C, middle C, is purposely written down lower so that it doesn't use those ledger lines as much, which means that it's one line, the second line down from the top. That is, it appears to be an F. So if you're thinking in bass clef, you're going to automatically think, wow, that's an F. It's a second finger or a third finger on the D string. But in reality, the tenor clef will be it will be a middle C, second finger or third finger on the A string, even though it's the second line down on the staff, on that 5-line staff. Then, as we proceed, we see that the tunes are written only in tenor clef, and this gives you that much needed rigorous focus. You have to use your brain very carefully to see and hear and feel and figure out fingerings and figure out notes and what is to be done. Oh, one thing I didn't mention about the first 5 is that I do transpose the same tune to a slightly higher key, but only in tenor clef. And yes, it can be confusing at first, and it's not maybe as incremental as it could be, but sometimes I think we kind of go a little too easy. Now, in that same vein, Suzuki, for example, does go a little too difficult, in my opinion. Yeah, there are some exercises at the end of the book, but they're pretty sparse. It's more like, hey, these are the notes in bass clef, and these are the notes rewritten in tenor clef. Here's Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star in bass clef, and exactly the same notes in tenor clef, and that's it. There's no other practice in the book other than the actual piece, which is a tonalization piece, not a numbered piece. And it is the Chanson Triste by Tchaikovsky in G minor. Okay, so after we get to 10, Then anything after that is just bonus material, really, because they are tunes that are reused for the most part. I think there's one new one that I introduced, Intermezzo by Mascagni, where I transpose it to multiple different keys only in tenor clef. I don't use bass clef at all after number 5. And then we come to the very last number, Good King Wenceslas, which was introduced in the first 5 numbers, where you see it and play it in bass clef, then you play it again in exactly the same key in tenor clef, then it's transposed into a new key in tenor clef. Now at the end, I use, I think, almost a dozen keys or so, probably 8 actually, total, or a dozen total, because I only use the major key, which Good King Wenceslas is in. It's a major major tonality piece. Good King Wenceslas is pretty simple. It's straightforward. There's a little jumping here and there, but it's nothing crazy. And by this point in your learning, you've done some challenging things, musically speaking. So this is a walk in the park. I utilize it mainly to demonstrate what a piece looks like in higher and higher registers in the tenor clef. And then, like I said, you just get a lot of good practice when you're playing. All right, this is getting to be a bit of a longer episode than I anticipated, but I am a bit of a wordy person when it comes to talking, even though I have an outline in front of me. Here's a question. Are there other books already out there that could teach me these things? Do I need to get another book? I mean, maybe I already have a book in my library that would do the same thing. My answer to that is twofold. Yes, there are other books. Will it do the same thing? No. I've done a lot of research. I have been playing cello a long time, and I've been teaching quite a long time, over 20 years now. And there is no book out there that just gives you this kind of repetitive practice. Here's a book, though, that I think gets very, very close, and I recommend this all the time. Rick Mooney's set of position pieces, and I think there are 4 books in that set. There is 2nd, 3rd, and 4th position. That's the first book. Then there's 5th, 6th, and 7th positions. That's the second book. And then there are 2 thumb position books. And I know for sure that in the second book for 5th, 6th, and 7th positions, he uses the tenor clef frequently. So I always recommend Rick Mooney's books. They are fantastic. He did a masterful job of bringing cello positions into the 20th and, of course, now the 21st century. It works fabulously, and I was ecstatic when I discovered these books. Now, of course, there's always standard repertoire, but of course, that's precisely why I wrote this book. It's really just to make it easier on you to read standard repertoire. And of course, there are the method books. There are so many method books that have been written over the last 200 years that cello really has been considered a standalone solo instrument if you want it to be. Before it was actually just a bass instrument, an accompanying instrument. But again, they don't do the same things. They introduce the tenor clef, they give all the notes, and they explain a little bit of what the tenor clef is there for and how to read it, but it does not really give you the practice that you need or want. In my mind, when I wrote this book, using familiar tunes makes it accessible. You know how when you do anything and you're already familiar with some portion of it, or at least the idea of what's going on, you often can just drop right in. But if you don't know, it's like learning a new game, a new table game. If you have no idea what the game is about, you're lost for the first 10, 20, 30 minutes. You got to see plays. You got to see results. You got to look at people's faces and find out what's going on for real. And that's the same thing with tenor clef. Right. The last thing on the list is I have some ideas that I know can make it easier on yourself. And the reason I know is I've got these ideas mainly from other teachers, my own teachers, but I've read about them, I've used them on myself, and I've asked my students to do these things from time to time. And every time you do at least a couple of them, or even one of them regularly, it makes everything better. First on the list to make reading tenor clef easier on yourself is obviously read it often, every single day for at least 2 weeks. You can also copy something out by hand, get staff paper and just write it out. There is nothing like writing something by hand. I'm sure you've experienced this in writing sentences or writing words. I mean, there's just nothing like it. You can feel it. You can see it coming to life on the page. You can also write all the letter names over or under the notes if you like. And if you don't want to write it directly in your music, copy it. Make a copy of the page and write it out that way. Or just get a blank sheet of paper and instead of writing out the notes themselves, just write out the names of the notes in sequential order as it is there on the music. You can test yourself by sight reading a new piece after practicing diligently and getting quite familiar with tenor clef. Here's a really good one so you can actually hear what the names of the notes are. Say the names before you play. Just go through a line or a phrase. If you have the stamina, go through the whole piece. But I would suggest more like a phrase or a line at a time. Then say the names as you play. That's a great test of coordination and skill and focus. Lastly, but not least, sing along. Sing the note names. Make them your lyrics so that you are just incorporating basically every aspect of music into your practice time. Great. I know that this is going to be helpful. I just feel it. I wrote it mainly because I saw students struggling, and I've asked several students to test it out, and they all agree this does help. And as, of course, with anything, it is left to the student to do the work. You've got to put in the time. You've got to do the heavy lifting on your own. There's only so much that one can do for you, right? As they say, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. Well, anyway, I don't mean to be condescending at all. I was in your same shoes if you are the ones that need practice reading tenor clef. I was there. I remember failing hard and just getting it wrong. But I also remember the moments where I started to realize that I was just playing rather than having to think about it and transpose it. All right, you can find where to buy these things and go become a paid member on at my Patreon. I'll have the links in the descriptions, and I'm going to have an accompanying video that talk a little bit more about the tunes and give live demonstrations as to the ideas to make it easier on yourself. Until then, be sure to play more Forgotten Cello music.